Today we are playing with the most broken, overpowered blue-red cards of all time. In the most recent Vintage Challenge, blue-red tempo came 3rd place and the deck is sick. This deck is all about disrupting the opponent while using busted cantrips and Ragavan on the early game to outpace the opponent. A card that you don't normally see in Vintage is Thought Scour. This is used to fuel many delve cards in the deck to make turns way more explosive. There are also just powerful one-ofs in the Planeswalkers and Expressive Iteration to keep the cards flowing, and overall the deck is just very smooth and plays out nicely. We dominate with this deck, so you want to watch the whole video, so don't forget to like and subscribe, and also check out Mana Traders with my code for 10% off. We start off match 1 keeping a somewhat risky hand. A turn 1 Ragavan is great, but if my opponent's playing a deck where I need to have a turn 1 Force of Will, we can easily get blown out. The Ragavan resolves, then my opponent untaps, casts a Mox Sapphire and a Black Lotus and an Ancestral Recall, but somehow ends up passing the turn back. We've untapped with Ragavan, let's attack with it first. Now something that you don't see in Modern, we hit a Mox off the top of the opponent's deck. Let's play our free land. I'm also going to play my land and play my Expressive Iteration. Don't forget we play artifacts in the deck like Mox Sapphire, Mox Ruby, Black Lotus. We can hit one of them. We're not too concerned about our land drop. Well, we hit a Black Lotus and a Force of Will. I think it's clear what we're meant to do here. On our end step, our opponent casts Vampiric Tutor. I'm not going to counter that. I'm just going to counter what they fetch. Our opponent plays Mana Crypt, sacks their Lotus, and plays Bolas' Citadel. Now if you're curious why we're playing Pyroblast in our main deck, then this is the answer. We win this counter war. Our opponent has nothing left to do. We draw a Bolt and get in with the Ragavan. Hitting a Force of Will, I'm going to go for Dig Through Time and try and get some more counterspells in my hand. I find a Pyroblast and an Iteration, so we keep on digging. As I've already played my land, we've just got to hold on to this Narset. They win the coin flip from Mana Vault, cast Gitaxian Probe, and pass back. We attack with Ragavan, Lightning Bolt the Hull Breacher, flip a Time Bolt off the top. We're not going to cast that, let's just get the Narset down, finding a Merchant Scroll. Here's where things get a bit interesting though, as they have an Underworld Breach off the top. Now there is a Narset in place so they can't draw extra cards, and weirdly they cast Vampiric Tutor. I think it would have been better to cast Black Lotus and then cast Bolas' Citadel, because the Black Lotus goes back to the graveyard, and then try to do something with your life total, but who knows, weird game, on to game 2. In sideboarding, I take out Thought Scours, Murktide, Repeal, and Daze as they're very slow in this matchup, and I bring in a lot of specific interaction that fights their deck and combo. Going into game 2, on the draw, have to mulligan a no land 7 and keep a quite bad 6. I don't particularly like to mulligan for Force of Will, especially down to 5 in these types of matchups, as they do tend to be grindy. Bottom the Mystic Sanctuary, and our opponent just plays Urza Saga and says go. Off the top though, we whip a Wasteland. This is amazing. Let's Gitaxian Probe them and then Wasteland. I think they're wasting a mental misstep here, especially against me when they know I'm playing Pyroblast, so that's fine by me. Let's Wasteland, say go. They just play a Misty, pass back, and while it is tempting to play the Ragavan here, it's more sensible to hold up Pyroblast. Our opponent plays another fetch and a Mox and passes back the turn. This is the exact speed that our hand wants this game to go. With Force of Negation off the top, I now feel comfortable casting the Ragavan, holding up Pyroblast and Mental Misstep, or Pyroblast and Force of Negation. They have a Braid for our creature. We can't force because of the wording of the card, so we let them untap. The opponent continues to do a load of nothing. I'm not going to Mental Misstep a Soul Ring because they'll be playing things like Pyroblast in their deck, and top decking a Narset. I still want to be patient, let's land go. They cast a Hull Breacher on our end step. I'm not going to Pyroblast it with it on the stack. I'm going to Pyroblast the Hull Breacher on their upkeep, so if they have something like Flusterstorm, they have to use their mana on their upkeep. Our opponent does nothing, we top deck a Thought Scour. It's time to slam the Narset. They have hardcast Force of Will, which is not bad for us here, so let's just say go. They sacrifice their Mox Pearl to cast a Tinker. I'm going to Force of Negation pitching the Thought Scour, as I'm scared of something like Pyroblast to counter back on the Force. They ship it back, we top deck a Shattering Spree, let's just use it. The draw go boring gameplay continues to continue, but we top deck a Merchant Scroll. Let's cast that, get an Ancestral Recall, and wait for them to fetch, as I am scared that they have a Hull Breacher in hand. We continue to draw the nuts, let's dash this Ragavan, get in for 2, we hit a Mox off the top, cast it, and say go. Our opponent continues to land go, they're now representing Hull Breacher. I'm still going to dash my Ragavan and get in. Our opponent finally casts a spell, Urza Lord High Artificer. Now, I have two options. I can fetch Mystic Sanctuary and put a counterspell on top now, or I can Ancestral Recall. If they have a counterspell, then I can Mystic Sanctuary back Ancestral Recall. That seems more sensible. We don't draw too amazingly, so let's just Shattering Spree and play our Ragavan. Things are starting to pull away when they top deck a Mana Crypt and it now allows them to activate Urza. However, they flip a coin in their upkeep and the Mana Crypt will bolt themselves if they can't find a way to remove it off the table. So that's one of our lines to win the game. We mental misstep a Ponder and they say go. We whiff in our draw step and we have to pass back and they get bolted by the Mana Crypt. Now the game spirals out of control even more as they flip a Bolas's Citadel from the Urza and they start to cast a lot of things. But don't forget, this Mana Crypt can bolt them on their next upkeep. They clearly whiff on the top card of their deck as they only have 3 life left remaining with Bolas's Citadel. So they play a Hull Breacher, pass back, we cast an Expressive Iteration, don't really hit much, and we gotta ship back the turn. They lose the coin flip, they take 3 damage, and we win the match. GG's, on to the next one. Round 2, we're on the draw. We've got a Mox, Ragavan, and Pyroblast. It's a risky keep, but F it. I love my Rags. They start with a fetch land and a Mox. We top deck a Wasteland, so let's dash this Ragavan and hold up Pyroblast. We hit a Merchant Scroll that we can't cast, so let's pass with both Thought Scour and Pyroblast up. Our opponent just land goes. As our mana is precious and I can sacrifice his treasure at any time, I decide not to Thought Scour and we whiff on our land again, so let's dash our Ragavan again. We don't hit anything, they take 2, untap, play Gitaxian Probe, and a Sensei's Divining Top, spin it, and pass back. We top deck another Ragavan, so we still have to make the play of dashing our Ragavan. They control the top card of their library with Sensei's Divining Top, and we exile their Ragavan. Now this is actually helpful for us, because I don't want to spend 2 mana dashing Ragavan every turn, so let's just cast theirs and be able to use this Wasteland next turn, or use the Wasteland to cast Dak Faded. They double Dark Ritual and cast Yawgmoth's Will. This is a card that normally instantly wins the game, so I'm going to Thought Scour myself for the potential chance of a Force of Will. Wow, we actually hit the Force of Will. I've got to counter this with Pyroblast backup, so let's see what happens. The Force of Will actually resolves, and they cast a Wheel of Fortune. Now this draws us into the absolute nutters. Loads of counterspells against the clear Storm deck, so now I'm feeling like we're in the perfect spot. They cast a Narset, we've obviously got a Pyroblast, we untap, hit another Ragavan that's useless, so let's play our Lotus, attack for 2, Wasteland their Volcanic Island, and say go. The rest of this game is extremely trivial. Our opponent casts a premium spell, we counter it. We attack with Ragavan, we hit something. They pass back, we cast a Narset, we cast removal, we cast counters. This is how you play Vintage. Going into boarding, we just want more specific counterspells and take out the clunky stuff. Going into game 2, we have a really nice hand. Brainstorm plus Fetchland, as well as Gitaxian Probe and Force of Will, are all spells that you want to see, as well as with Ramp from the Mox. Now a surprising play that you might see is they cast Ancestral Recall on our upkeep, and we don't Force of Will back. This is because if our opponent has their Force of Will of their own, it's such a blowout that they get rid of our Force of Will and fuel up 3 extra cards, so I'd rather try and counterspell a spell that will win the opponent the game, rather than a card advantage spell. We get perfect information on their hand because of Gitaxian Probe. I'll make sure to leave it in the top left corner for the rest of the game, and we get to Wasteland them as well as hold up Pyroblast. They have a Ragavan, there's not much we can do, so let's try and Brainstorm while the Ragavan is in combat to try and put a dead card on top of our deck. It resolved, so let's give them a Scalding Tarn. This Murktide is actually in a really good spot because we have multiple Force of Wills and Pyroblast to help it hit the table. Getting rid of this Narset means that they're tapped out and is giving us an opportunity to try and resolve the Murktide region, especially since they Force of Will back. So now we can Force of Will the Narset, untap, and Murktide region. It's important to remember that they do have the Dismember in hand, so I don't particularly want to block this Ragavan, but annoyingly they hit Dak Fading off the top of my deck, which could potentially be a problem. They loot with Dak, play their Mana Crypt, and pass back the turn. Now they do have both Flusterstorm and Dismember up here, but top decking this Ancestral Recall, we can play our land and actually pay for the Fluster. First I'm going to attack the Dak Fading to see if they want to use the Dismember, and then we can Ancestral plus pay. I personally think it's a huge waste for them to use the Fluster, but they decide to do so, so gotta fetch, pay 3 mana, and we draw some nice cantrips. They also take 3 from the Mana Crypt, so this Murktide region is looking more juicy turn by turn. They loot 2 with Dak Fading, discarding 2 blanks. They use Tinker to sacrifice the Mana Crypt to find Bolas's Citadel, but they're actually getting to a very low life total because of the Murktide Regent. They attack with Ragavan, hit a brick, and they pass back. Hitting this Murktide region, we can actually find lethal in many ways, and this is because if we can fuel up our graveyard with enough cards, we can exile them with Murktide region and pump the Murktide region on the table. Finding Time Walk, Thought Scour, Emergent Scroll, what we can do is put the Thought Scour in our hand, the Time Walk into exile, cast the Thought Scour targeting ourselves, threatening our opponent to Time Walk. So if they counter the Thought Scour, then we can just Time Walk and win the game, or if the Thought Scour resolves, we can play our land, play our Murktide region, delve all the spells away, and the Murktide on the table gets pumped, and then we can attack. It's a really cool double lethal line, and the opponent concedes the game. Going into the final round, unfortunately we lost to a turn 1 kill in game 1, and in game 2 they had a very interactive hand plus Urza's Saga which outvalued us and then slammed a big Sphinx. Overall, I really enjoyed this deck and had a ton of fun. And if you want to see more vintage content, then please like and subscribe and let me know in the comment section down below. But that's about it. Check out this video because YouTube thinks you'll like it.